Welcome to this episode of Chesterfield Community Church Life Stories. My name is Keith Utley and I am your host. And just as a river flows through our diverse landscapes, each person that we meet, whether it's a work colleague or a neighbor or a friendly barista, each has navigated a unique journey shaped by the currents of life events. And this is equally true as a community of believers. This venue is a way for us to journey together by sharing our stories and deepening our connections and creating a stronger bond with one another. Now, before we dive into this episode with our featured guest, let me introduce to you our unpaid sponsor. This episode of Chesterfield Community Church Life Stories is brought to you by CCC Small Group Ministry. We have options that range from men's and women's groups to couples groups, co-ed groups. All of our small groups cater to various life stages and ages and schedules, meeting your needs throughout the week. New groups are continually forming, so for more information about CCC's small group ministry, you can check them out at chesterfieldcommunity.org. So we're grateful for CCC's small group ministry sponsoring this episode of Chesterfield Community Church Life Stories. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Gerry Balassi. And I've known Gerry just for a little over 2 years, and you've been in my home. I've been in your home. We've had dinner together, and with your late wife, and we've had some interesting, fascinating discussions. And so I just think your story is so interesting. Could you just share with us, beginning with Gerry, what's your place of origin?
I was born in Italy.
Italy?
A town called Fiume, which means river, because there's a river going through.
Okay.
And at the time, it was Italian.
Italian.
And as a result of Dictator Mussolini joined Germany on the Second World War, when the war ended, we became part of communist Yugoslavia at the time under Tito.
Okay.
And that's something that at the time I really hated, but you see as we talk more, that has some impact on my life.
Right.
Because shortly after the war ended, around 1945, a couple of years later, we were forced to become communist.
Oh, wow.
Because the regime was communist, and we didn't want to, and the majority of the people in the town didn't want to. So basically, they told us to pack up our suitcase and leave.
Who's we? Who?
The communist regime that took over.
Okay, so what wasn't Mussolini?
Mussolini was a dictator of Italy, and he joined Hitler.
Hitler, okay.
Yeah, and so shortly after the war ended, because Hitler lost, they had to give up some towns, and one of the towns was the one I was born in, which is now called Rijeka, same thing in Croatia. And it's Croatia because Yugoslavia is broke down into too many different countries.
Okay, all right. So how old were you when that occurred?
I was born at the beginning of the war in 1940.
Okay.
And the war ending around 45, 46. So I was about 6 years old.
Yeah.
And amazing enough, I don't want to divert, but
no,
I remember so many things.
Okay.
And when I would ask my mom, what did that happen? She said, you remember that?
Wow.
I mean, I remember things happening both good and bad when I was 2, 3, 4 years old. Because the war ended in 45. I was 5 years old.
Right. So what do you remember actually about the war itself?
War and bombs and running to the refugee when the alarm went off. Not too many pleasant things. And the worst part, my dad worked in a company, the factory that made torpedoes.
Oh, really?
So when the Germans took over, they moved the whole factory away from where it was because it was known so that the enemy would not throw bombs at it. And took the family and everything into a small town near Udine. And we stayed there probably a couple, 3 years. So I kind of grew up in there.
Oh, okay. So you were born in a small village, and then during the war, you and your whole family were moved to another.
Well, it was a city. It was a small, but they, as soon as shortly after the war started, they picked up and moved and took us in this town.
Okay.
When the war ended, we came back.
Okay. Then you came back.
Came back and we stayed there until we were forced to leave because we refused to become communists. And that was around 1947.
Okay.
So in 1947, we re-entered Italian territory as refugee from a communist country.
Oh, wow.
Spent 3 days in a refugee camp because we had no place to go.
Right.
And then my mom had a younger sister that moved earlier, close to Genova in Italy. And so we went there and we were there until 1956 when we came to the United States as a refugee from a communist country.
Wow. So what do you remember as a kid? What was school like for you during the war?
It wasn't bad. I fortunately they were still teaching Italian. After that they changed it, but until I was there, and I only did a couple of grades because we moved and re-entered Italian territory. So I went to the first year of elementary, second year elementary, and then I went re-enter Italian territory when I finished the rest of the schooling.
Yeah.
Until the first year of high school, which I had to end that because we moved from the United States.
So have you still retained all of you still speak?
I speak fluent Italian, grammatically Italian, because I went to school there. Yeah.
Wow.
And I finished school in Italy.
Yeah. So, and then I don't think I asked you this. Do you have any siblings?
I have one brother. He's older. He's going to be 90 in 10 days.
Wow. Are you still close to him?
Oh, yeah. We see pretty often. He's 15 minutes from my house.
Okay.
Drive.
All right. Cool. So is there any other insights from your childhood experiences?
Well, there's a lot of them, some good, some bad. Some of the good one was, a lake behind where we were staying with the people that host us. They were forced to host us when my dad got moved. The bad thing, I remember running to refuge. My dad say, watch the bomb. You can see those little pills coming down the plane. And he would say, well, we're safe. Fortunately, they never find out where we were. But they were off to the factory, which was probably 5 miles from where we were living.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's some nice things. The people there were very nice. They took me fishing, when I was little. One time I wound up into a fishing hole that they had built. They had dug into the small lake, and fortunately when I fell in, I went like this. Otherwise, I would not be here to tell you anything, because my brother saw me and he pulled me out.
Pulled you out.
But things like that I remember. I remember walking into a place where they were, unbeknown to me, they were distilling grapes to make wine. And I went in and there was kind of a little vapor, and I got as drunk as can be just by smelling the vapor. My dad rushed me out right away. And by the way, it was illegal to do that.
Right, yeah.
But things like that.
Yeah, precious memories there, even in a war-torn country,
That's good and bad. I asked a question when I was in college to my psychology professor in child psychology, and he said, you remember the real good things or you remember the real bad thing, and as early as 2, and that's amazing because
So you lived there in Italy?
We lived in a province of Genoa, a town called Ronco, from 1947 to 1956.
Okay.
The last year we moved close to Genova because and rent a place because we had to make many trips to the American consulate. There's a lot of preparation to come to this country legally.
Right.
We spent almost 2 years going different. Wow. If they found any association with us in communities, we wouldn't be able to get out.
Yeah.
But I went there and waited, and finally went into a waiting list that sometimes took years. But they asked my parents if we were willing to fly. We wouldn't have to wait that long because too many people would not fly a 4-engine across the ocean. That's all you had in those days.
Wow.
And my mom and dad said, sure. So we only waited like a couple of months instead of maybe 2 years. And this is after the 2 years of practice.
Right.
And paperwork.
So when you immigrated, were you starting to learn English then, or you didn't learn any?
I went to a 2 months quick course to I forgot what the name was, but I learned a few words like bread and wine and please, very very.
Please and thank you.
I could not do much of anything.
Yeah, right. So how old were you then when you all? Did you just take a plane directly from Italy to the United States,
or did you from Rome?
From Rome,
to New York, but we stopped a couple of different places.
Okay.
It took almost day and a half. And for the first time in my life, we stopped someplace in, I don't know if it was Ireland or whatever, but I have bacon and eggs for breakfast. First time in my life.
First time in your life. You were once a high schooler. First time have bacon and eggs for, yeah.
Yeah, when I went from the plane, it was 1956, I guess.
Yeah. Wow.
So I was a teenager already and never had bacon and eggs. It smelled good, so it tasted good.
Tasted good?
I had it plenty since.
So you flew then into New York City?
Yes.
Okay.
LaGuardia.
LaGuardia. So what do you remember about that?
Well, we were sponsored by the Catholic Relief Foundation,
Okay.
and they pay our trip because he had no money.
Right.
And that's another part of the story. But I remember going through the LaGuardia. I remember going through a lot of custom check and all of that. And then they asked no
So whatever you came to this country with, just whatever you flew with, right? I mean, would you
just a couple of suitcases.
Just a couple of suitcases.
Yeah, and there's more to that because the rest of our belongings, like there were about 3 crates, wooden crates, unbeknown to us, they put them on the bottom of the Andrea Doria. And if you remember, you may not, that's a ship it was a luxury liner that sank as it got close to New York.
Oh, really?
By an ice, a boat was breaking ice.
Oh.
And so we keep waiting for the stuff, and all of a sudden we found out, well, that's how they put it, because Andrea Doria was going from Genoa to New York, and we were there, and they were going to utilize the space. And so finally they says, well, I'm sorry, you're never going to get your luggage.
Oh, wow. So
we came with suitcases, that's it.
That's it. Just all you had was just the suitcases.
And 4 of us, my mom, my dad, and my brother.
Wow. So you landed in New York City.
In LaGuardia, and then we went by train. It took 48 hours to come by train from New York to St. Louis. And the crazy part is we had a sponsor, but we have no idea where we were going.
No, right.
And when I found St. Louis one time in the map, there is a small St. Louis town somewhere in Mexico, and that wasn't it. It just was amazing. We landed, and fortunately the sponsor waited for us at Union Station. And there's some long stories. I don't know how far you want to go with this.
So you had a sponsor that met you at Union Station,
and they found a place for us to go to sleep and live on. It was close to St. Louis University on West Point.
Okay.
And then we stayed there. They found a job for us. The thing that you have to remember, we have no money.
Right.
Even left some debt, which we paid 10 years later, nearly.
Wow.
And in New York, they were supposed to give us $25 a piece. Well, they cheat us and gave us 25 cents. Now, in 1956, you can buy a couple of sandwiches and a soda with 25 cents in a car, but that's all we have in 48 hours. Wow. When we got to St. Louis, the sponsor said, would you like to eat? Politely, we said, we're okay. And Mom said, we're starving. And I said, what do you mean? We have no money. Then that's how they find out they cheated us, so we wouldn't have to pay it back. Because all of that went into a bill that we eventually pay back over the next couple of years. So really, it came from nothing.
So your parents obviously made this decision for you all. So what made them to decide to want to go through this process?
I remember, that's a good question, because I remember one time somebody asking my dad that question before we left.
Yeah.
And he says, and his answer was, I quote, I want to be sure I'm able to put a plate of minestra on the table every day.
Okay, so explain that in English.
Minestra is food.
It means
Because once we left our original town and went back in Italy, things were tough economically.
Oh, yeah.
And we were poor.
Yeah.
Sometimes I had to go fishing, and if I didn't catch any, we didn't eat. It was really bad.
Wow.
That's why we want to move. He said, I want to make sure I can put food for my family on the plate. So we were very, very grateful to be here, able to get here because we were communists from refugees.
So what before the war started, what did your dad do?
My dad was working in a torpedo factory.
Before the war started?
Yeah, that was the only job he ever had.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
he was making the kicking the mechanism that made the torpedo explode once he hit something.
Okay.
Very high, sophisticated. He was a machine operator, a machinist.
Okay.
And then he had a hard time finding a job here. And of course, when we came back in Italy was so overcrowded and overpopulated, taking all these refugees, that you couldn't find a job.
Right.
And you were living off, the what do you call it? The government give you a lot of money.
Okay.
I forgot the word.
Government assistance.
It's a little assistance,
yeah.
But it was very little.
Right.
And just an aside, I remember going to the store that was making bread. My dad needed some bread, and they wouldn't give him credit anymore.
Oh.
And he took off the wristwatch that his dad gave him and handed over for 3 loaves of bread.
Wow.
And we got that back eventually.
Wow.
But that teaches you something.
Wow. We have no idea, do we?
Well, that's one of the questions later about the difference, people in here.
So what was it what was it like the first day of going to school in the United States?
Well, fortunately, I have a person who lived in the same house I did. I went to the same school, Roosevelt High School, and he gave me rides. I wouldn't have to worry about getting the bus. He took me in. It was different. The language, people, most of them are very helpful. Some of them are pretty ornery. They make fun of you, but most of them are very helpful. And I used to say what I learned to say very quickly. Sorry, I don't understand, because people will talk to you, and then they will explain with gesture and so forth. And it's a slow process. Eventually you learn 1 out of 4 words, and you try to make the rest 2 out of 4, and eventually, young age, you learn quickly.
Yeah.
I went to high school right away, spent 4 hours a day of learning English in high school, my first semester.
Right.
And did very well.
Yeah. Wow. Now, you say your brother is older. How much older?
6 years older.
So he was. Did he go to school, or he just go get his English?
He got the equivalent of high school.
Right.
And then when he came over here, they had jobs ready for us.
Okay.
There was a company called Orena Fresca Spaghetti, which is no longer in business, but they would take all of these newcomers because they're good workers.
Right.
They didn't pay very much. They were very good workers. So they all had jobs, and then eventually we got into better jobs.
Yeah. So how do you think your cultural background has influenced you in your upbringing, your identity as you grew up in the United States?
Well, I think it was kind of an advantage to grow up with some things that are kind of hard, but then you learn the hard way. And it's I was strong Roman Catholic as a child. I never missed church. Learned a lot about Jesus, but unfortunately didn't get to know him. But they did instruct between the church, the parents, respect for authorities, which starts with your parents, your teacher, your policeman, all that. That stays strong with me. And learn to do what you have and not be envy. So all of those things help me think in terms of what I expected out of my families that eventually having children. And you apply all that. You take your background, you take the good out of that, and you leave the bad out, and then you put it in line with what you're learning here, and you try to make the best out of both things.
So, going back as a child in Italy, you say your parents were very devout Roman Catholics, and so
hardly ever miss it.
Were you a choir boy and all of that?
I was an altar boy. I was a choir boy, and not too many people would do that because in those days in Italy the mass was done in Latin.
Okay.
So you had to learn
Latin.
I don't know if you know much about it. An altar boy responds to the priest's teaching. As he says something, you respond like the people would respond. Only the altar boys do that. And it's all in Latin. Okay, now, again, how Lord uses, a few years later, I'm in here taking Latin, and in one semester I got credit for Latin 1 to 5 because I knew it already, which helped me graduate earlier from high school.
Wow.
Because I lost 1 year during the transition.
Right, yeah. Wow. So how do you think your experience as an immigrant has shaped your educational and career path?
Well, obviously, I retain some of the things that I found valuable. Integrity, respect for parents, respect for grandparents, all that. I retain that. It helps me to accept life. I never expect that thing to be handed to me. As I was meeting with friends and finding out how they take so much for granted, I felt like, that's not really that good because you grow up knowing that you got everything you want, so you don't have to work for it.
Right.
My children didn't have that. One time my son wanted a new car, and I said, why do you want a new car? This is high school now for them. And he said, well, all the kids at school drive, Camaros and this and that. I said, you got a good car. He said to me, well, Dad, you can afford it. Why don't you buy it for me? I said, well, that's not how it works, son. If your car doesn't work, I'll get you another one. Well, things like that, eventually they learn, and in later life, it really told me they appreciated it because, bless the Lord, I'm blessed with a great family. And to this day, my children say things that make my button pop out of my shirt.
With pride, right?
Well, I don't use the word pride anymore because it was a big problem with me.
Okay.
But pleased.
Pleased. Okay. All right. So how did how did you come to faith in Jesus? Was that something happened later in your life, or?
Yes, as I got into this country, it was a little different because I didn't. The big thing that happened is my first wife, her name was Nicolina Colalina. When she was 42 years old, and this was a definite mark in my life in all directions. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, she came down with, she couldn't go to the bathroom. There was a blockage. She was eating normally, so went to the doctor. Long story short, they diagnosed her with a blocked colon.
Okay.
And he said you had to go surgery because it's blocked completely. So we rushed to the surgery and did the paperwork, went in a room. The second day they did the surgery, I got a call from the doctor, the surgery. He says, I don't want you to tell anything to your wife at this time, but it is cancer. It is bad, stage 3, and we'll talk some more about it, but don't say anything to her. And I'm in a room there, so I have to be quiet.
Right.
And it gave me more information. It says with chemotherapy and radiation therapy, we can extend that. And I said, well, how bad is this? Well, the best 5 years most. I said, oh my God. So I'm not supposed to tell her. But then my wife had an unbelievable experience. It's called a born-again experience while she was in the hospital.
Okay.
And that's what did it. While I'm doing the paperwork, this is later now.
Yeah.
I'm going, the day when she was due to be discharged, it's like some 4 days later, I'm going to her room and I'm going to tell her all that is happening that they told me not to tell her before, which now I could, which is kind of bad news.
Right.
And so she's sitting in the bed. I remember what she was wearing. I said, honey, there's something I got to tell you. And she says, I know what you're going to tell me. And she proceeded and told me everything that I knew that I was going to tell her.
Wow.
And so I said, damn, doctor, pardon me my language. They tell me to be quiet and they spilled the beans. Who told you all that? She says, nobody did. Now she got my attention. So she says, remember we were doing the paperwork and getting me into the hospital? Yeah. I picked up this ladies' magazine that I was there. I had this thing about picking it up. I took it to my room. Later on that night, after there was some emergency on the roommate, it got quiet. And I kind of heard this thing say, go ahead and read the newspaper. So I pick up the paper and I open it. And all of a sudden it was like a light shine, and everything I just told you, I read there. I only asked her one question. Was it really there or you imagined it was there? She says, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I never found the answer, but all I know is everything that she said is what happened. She told me that she had cancer, that with chemotherapy and radiation she might make it. But then she says, but the Lord healed me. Just like that. And it went right over my head. So
why do you think it went right over your head?
Because I wasn't spiritual I am today. That's what got my attention.
Okay.
Because not only that happened, she didn't know.
So you feel like that she was miraculously healed?
Yes,
at that.
she was.
Okay.
Because as she kept, when you have surgery like that and you go chemotherapy, you see the doctor months later, 2 months later, 3 months later.
She didn't have chemotherapy or anything like that?
She had chemotherapy and radiation. She had to.
Okay. She went through
But as she was going through that, she kept telling to the doctor, I don't know why we're doing this. The Lord healed me. They wouldn't believe her.
Yeah.
Until some like 8 months later, where the surgeon says, I cannot believe this. It's gone.
Wow.
And instead of 5 years, she lived 25 more years.
Wow.
And that cancer never came back. At a later age, in 2007, she developed a new one in the endometrium. And that one was really bad. They didn't catch him on time. And he got in the blood. And within 3 years, she went with the Lord.
Yeah.
That was after 50 years together.
Wow. It's a blessing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I got blessed because within less than 3 months, Susan came along.
Yeah.
And I had some prophecy about that. Said things happened to me, the Lord made happen to me an unbelievable believer.
Right.
If somebody asks me any questions, I says, who's got all the answers? Who? Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I said, just learn about him, study and practice. Said you got all the answer. And that I was proven in so many different way. People say, how'd you manage? You lost one wife, now you lost another one. Yeah. I couldn't do it without Jesus.
Right.
I'm anytime alone. I miss it, but I'm never lonely.
Right.
I'm never alone. I got Jesus.
So your wife had this miraculous healing in did she start going to church, or
Well,
were you
okay, to try to answer your question,
okay.
she was immediately became a born again, one of those overnight things,
Uh-huh.
which is good and it's bad,
Uh-huh.
because she went from one extreme to the other.
Okay.
When she got out of the hospital, she wanted me to do the same thing. I was still a Roman Catholic, was still going to church. It was hard for me to accept that.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, she really hit me hard to the point where I said, Jesus came between you and me. We had such a wonderful life, Lena. What's going on? Well, fortunately, she insisted, and eventually she got a hold of me. And 2 years later, I received Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and things changed.
2 years after that. Now, did she start attending another church? Or
Immediately.
Immediately.
I continued to go to Catholic church, and she went to a new church.
Okay. All right.
And that wasn't easy either. And eventually, she convinced me, and I started reading the Bible.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've already mentioned your children. You've had children. How old are your children?
I had 2 of them.
You have children.
I'm sorry, I had 3 of them. The oldest one just passed 60.
Okay.
The second one is 16 months behind, and the third one is 5 years behind.
So
I have 11 grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren. The last one was born premature, doing fine, 5.5 months.
Wow.
It's an unbelievable blessing.
Yeah, you're a blessed man.
Absolutely.
So you came to faith 2 years later? I mean, just at her...
It took about 2 years after the surgery before I started going to her church, which was a non-denominational Christian church, and couldn't believe guys raising their hands and praying and all that. But eventually, because it was such a drastic thing, eventually I joined a non-denominational church called the Vineyard. You might be familiar with it. And for the first time in my life, during the worship, I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, that's good."
So
slowly,
how did that feel when the first time you
very
did it?
very uncomfortable, but at the same time rewarding.
Okay. In what way?
In what way is that you feel like he's there? You don't just think he's there.
Yeah, right.
And so I still do that. And I was concerned when I joined this church because my previous knowledge was, well, you don't do that in the Baptist church. But then I found out people doing it here, so I'm right at home.
Yeah. All right. How do you think your faith has influenced your relationships with your family and friends and others in your circle of influence?
Well, I became a strong advocate for sharing Jesus, and I would do it at any opportunity. And sometimes that becomes a stumbling block, or even somebody getting upset with you. And I learned that from my wife. She will sit down, and somebody was next to her. Do you know Jesus as your Lord and Savior? I mean, really drastic. Sometimes not good that way. I'm a little more tactful than that. But I learned that, and I'm on fire for the Lord. I've been going mission trips. So I joined the International Fellowship of Christian Businessmen for many years, traveled to Jamaica mostly and other places, doing missionary work, sharing the Lord. Also locally, every month, once a month, we'll go East St. Louis or in the areas where you can set up food and people come and you tell them about Jesus. And so I'm strong on that. I went through a period.
And you still do that?
Well, I started saying I went through a period. There was a place where I was strong doing that. Then all of a sudden I started teaching men. I started doing men's Bible study, men's group in 1997, and been doing it ever since, one way or another.
And you still have a men's group, don't you?
Still do it, and we'll continue to do it as long as I'm healthy.
Yeah, and I know that I'm talking to some of the guys in your group. They're very grateful for you and your spiritual mentorship.
Thank you. And of course, I was involved with music. I was playing the worship team, and I was involved in so many other things. Whatever the opportunity brings, I'm still a deacon, even though I'm not acting right now.
Yeah. How has your faith community supported you in your faith journey?
Always great. Every church I went to, it was always support. In my case, mostly spiritual, because I wanted to grow. But they were always there, ready to help. And by all means, this beats them all. This is the best. This is the longest I've been in any church other than my.
You're talking about Chesterfield Community Church.
I'm talking about Chesterfield Community Church. People are from the very first day very friendly. And my second wife, Susan, had a long relationship with the pastor here that just left because of her ability to deal with people in trouble. She was a licensed
counselor,
therapist. Therapist. Yeah. And so a lot of the people in this church she knew because of her efforts. And so it was different. It was just like being home away from home. Strong family ties here. People care.
Yeah. So looking at over your years of faithful living, what lessons or insights have you gained that you would like to pass on to future generations?
Well, several. One of them early on, I learned that when I get into a difficult situation, if I just remember to say, what would Jesus say or what would Jesus do, which is something I teach the people, then they always get the answer. You never go wrong. The trouble is sometimes you listen to the devil and you don't listen right away, and so you get in trouble before you say, I should ask the Lord.
Yeah.
But that if people could just remember that, especially if they'll love to be able to put the Bible into practice, which is hard to do. The enemy is always tempting you. But if you just remember, what would Jesus say? What would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Because he's got the answers.
Right. Anything else you would?
Well, I learned in my professional career, after I became a strong believer in Jesus and a follower, anytime there was a difficult situation, like having to fire somebody, or having to go to a union deal where you had to defend the company.
Right.
If I pray that morning before I left, everything went well. If I forgot for whatever reason, I had trouble. So again, it's just unbelievable thing to where I know you don't need to pray every time because it works. It works. Trust me.
Right.
I can be an experience to that.
But just the presence of God, and you felt
it's unbelievable.
Acknowledging that.
That's the most that I can tell anybody.
Yeah.
The other thing is, for those who are married, on their wedding, I've always says, don't ever go to sleep mad at your spouse.
Okay.
Even if you're upset, kiss her goodnight, and maybe you sleep in different room. But don't ever, and that works. That works. And there's no reason for that. If you love one another and you love the Lord, there's no reason. But that's something that I tell people when I go to a wedding and they ask me, what would you advise? That's my advice.
Right.
Other than also tell them, and then if you know Jesus, you got it made.
All right. Yeah. He draws you together. Yeah.
Well, the problem that they have to remember is not just knowing the Bible, they got to put it in practice.
Right.
And too many people that call themselves Christian, and I hope I'm not going out of line, but they don't act like Christian.
Right.
They just say they're Christian, then you look at the action. You have to act, and then you get blessed.
Yeah.
Obedience gives you blessings.
Yeah. So how do you vision continuing to live your life in service and ministry?
Well, obviously, I'm going to continue to be a Bible study
small group leader
or whatever. I still do whatever I can as a deacon. I try to help where I can. I recently volunteered for the children. I've done that for the last couple of months. I'm altar
I know that you're beloved by the children in the children's ministry.
I'll tell my funny jokes once in Italian exposure. I played the harmonica for them, so they love it.
All right. Are you ready for the lightning round of questions? I have 3 questions for you. All right. Favorite Italian restaurant on the hill?
On the hill.
On the hill.
Zia?
Yeah, that's a good place, yeah. Favorite Italian dish to cook or eat?
Well, if you don't have any problems with carbohydrates, there's nothing like a good homemade sauce with spaghetti and meatballs.
Okay. Now, do you cook, right?
I know I cook all the time, but because of some problem I had with my health about 8 months ago, I really low on carbs. I'm doing Italian like ravioli or pasta once a week or maybe less.
Okay.
But I've learned to cook healthy.
You had to cut down the carbs, huh? Espresso or cappuccino?
Cappuccino, by all means.
Okay.
Espresso is something that you drink in a hurry in between jobs so that you cut down on your ability to fall asleep on your job.
Okay. What's your favorite Italian word or phrase?
Buon appetito.
Buon appetito. That's good. Well, thank you so much, Gerry. We appreciate you, and thank you for your service and ministry and sharing your story with the
appreciate being here, and sorry if I went too far chasing rabbits, but there's so much in my history.
No, it's all good. Thank you
Thanks
very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right.